Well, thank you all for being here today. This is nice to see you. I do appreciate you coming. What's that? I don't, well, I don't know that we're doing a Zoom, right? Because this isn't a Zoom room. I think this is just recording, right? Okay. So they can see it later. We can email comments. That'll be good. So really, I do appreciate you coming out. I know the weather is not great, so thank you. We'll have plenty of time for questions this way, though. This is a project I've been working on with several co-authors that I have done a couple of different projects with, looking at the 2022 release of the GSS, which originally came in, we had some original data that came out in the fall, and then they have more recently updated that with a couple additional variables, which I'll talk about a little bit more, that came out just in January. But the data are relatively the same, but there's just a couple of new variables that have been released. So this is looking specifically at survey enjoyment and data quality. So I'll start with a background of why this is important and a little bit about the GSS. I think all of you know about the GSS pretty well at this point, but I'll give a background nonetheless. Talk about the analysis we've run and the results, and discussion. I'd love your thoughts and feedback as well. So first, a background. Obviously, it's really important to public policy to have high quality data, and that gets more challenging. Also, not only is it challenging to have high quality data, it's also challenging to get survey participation in the first place. Response rates have gone down. You've got telephone response rates are below 10% now. So it's really something that's important that we get people to potentially respond to the survey and then provide high quality data. And this has been, low response rates have been something that APOR and others have been, the American Association for Public Opinion Research and others have been kind of sounding the alarm on for years now, going back to at least the late 90s, concerns about low response rates and growing negative attitudes toward surveys. Some of this was, surveys were kind of thought of as spam calls. You see telephone surveys, nobody wants to answer them. And it's, we see obviously a proliferation of web surveys now of varying quality. And so we want people to respond to the surveys, but we also want to minimize behaviors that are concerning. So ideally, we'd want to minimize, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, we want to minimize things like acquiescence bias or extreme response bias or non-differentiation or straight lining. We'd want to minimize those behaviors to the extent that we can. And so again, potentially, if somebody is, what are the things that potentially influence whether somebody is providing that potentially higher quality data, and potentially a survey enjoyment, one of those things. So probably not surprisingly, researchers have become more interested in understanding both respondents' attitudes towards surveys. Why do people either want to take a survey or not want to take a survey? And how people use design features to evaluate surveys. And then also what factors are associated with survey participation. So this uses, as I mentioned, the data from the General Social Survey, the GSS. This is administered by NORC at the University of Chicago. They do a large amount of survey projects, really high quality data generally. It's a national sample of adults 18 or older. The interviews were conducted in both English and Spanish. This is actually a variable that was just recently added. It was actually in the fall data set, but it was missing, so they just added whether the interviews are in Spanish are in there. So that's kind of a nice thing. There are incentives, so everybody had some sort of an incentive, ranging from $50 to over $200 of incentive. So it's one of the reasons why GSS always says, well, we've got such high response rates. Well, one of the reasons is they provide everybody incentives. And you can go through the tabulation of it, but it goes, everybody in the 3,500 or so respondents, everybody got an incentive of some sort. The minimum was $50. There's a mix of prepaid and postpaid incentives. The field period you see on the screen here, May 4th to December 20th. Like I said, there was some data that came out in late December, and then they added to it from there. There's also, and I'll talk more about this at the end, there's also a Paradata file that they've released more recently That includes things like how long the survey took. So that's something that I think is going to be a next step for this particular project. Total sample, like I said, a little bit over 3,500. The APOR RR3 response rate is a little over 50%, so really good for a survey like this. Again, telephone surveys have response rates that are under 10% now.
Andy, would you want us to hold questions to the end, or is it okay to?
Yeah, please, yeah.
And then just cut us off when Link gets mastery.
Wow.
So is it still face-to-face? Like, do they knock on doors, or how did they, like, can you tell me just?
Yes.
Or are you gonna get there?
I will get there. Yeah. Okay, so sorry. Yeah, they during the pandemic they went more towards web surveys. Okay. They are still doing face-to-face. So it's a mix now. And this is actually one of the variables we end up putting in the model of mode, because you might think that people might enjoy an in-person survey more than a web survey, for example, or if telephone survey potentially more. So yeah, they do still do quite a few in-person surveys.
Do they recruit in person, or how do they get them all kinds of ways?
They actually did they did an experiment this year of the initial contact. There's a variable called mode sequence that actually is how they contacted them at first. Was it an in-person or a phone contact? So that's actually something they just released. Okay. So it's not in our model yet because of that, but it's that they did release that model or that variable that they did an experiment this year for mode sequence.
So they do there's a mix.
Yes.
Oh wow, I did not realize that.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure. I believe that's actually new for this particular year, the mode sequence, the mode sequence experiment. Yeah.
But it's not random, right?
I don't believe so. No.
And it's not random. Which mode?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't believe so.
No. They probably get you any way they can.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Just maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit, but is the in-person the one where basically you hand the laptop to the respondent and not the
I believe so.
Interviewer
yeah.
Rounding off the like they would on a phone.
Yeah, I think that is the case. I will check on that to be sure, but I believe that's the case. Yeah. I believe so.
Okay, I think so.
Yeah.
So the web is very different than in-person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and so, okay.
Yes.
And combination, sorry, again, maybe I'm sorry anticipating the.
No. That's So there's some that were actually completed part in person, part in web, part in phone, part in web. There actually are combination modes in those cases. Not very many, but yeah. Yeah, of course.
What is the average length of time for the year?
They just released that. I don't know off the top of my head, but that's in the parrot area. They just released for it.
It's like roughly less than an hour?
Yeah, I want to say, if I looked at the tabulation, I want to say it's 30 or 40 minutes if my memory serves correct. Yeah. But I've got that. I do have that data. It's a separate file. I've got the actual GS. I thought I'd bring in the actual GSS data in case you had any questions about it. I did not bring the Paradata file, but I can get the Paradata file. So yeah, good questions, and thank you. And yes, please feel free to jump in anytime. So the goals here are to do a couple of things. One, to develop an index of favorability towards surveys. So and I'll get more into this, there is a single item question that asks about whether you enjoy taking surveys, but there are also other questions that could be potentially thought of as an index of survey climate, which I'll talk about in a minute. Then investigate the correlates of self-reported survey favorability. So what is it about surveys or people that indicates how much they enjoy taking surveys? And then finally, examine the extent to which self-reported survey favorability is associated with measures of data quality. And I'll get more into those, but I kind of hinted at that. So this is acquiescence bias, extreme response style, and non-differentiation or straight lining. So first, the index of favorability. So like I said, there's a single item question on the GSS that is a survey enjoyment variable. So overall, how much do you enjoy participating in a survey? Would you say a great deal, a good bit, some, a little, or not at all? So that is basically what we've done here is we've run models using both of these. One is, and I'll get more into this, and you'll see this when I get to the results, is that you can kind of think about them a little bit differently, because one is an actual, and so one is an actual enjoyment, and then we have these other two questions you could imagine are related to survey climate. So willingness to use video chat for future surveys and willingness to use in-person for future surveys. So for example, how likely is it that you will be willing to use a video chat for a survey interview in the next few months? Very likely, somewhat likely, not very likely, or not at all likely. So you can imagine that if somebody is, if they feel good about surveys, they would be potentially more willing to participate in a future video chat or in person. So the in-person is just simply the same question with how likely is it you'd be have someone visit, excuse me, visit your home for an in-person interview in the next few months. So you can imagine all three of these items could be used to think about how people feel about surveys. And we call this a survey climate index. And so, but you could also imagine when you look at these, this is obviously a variable that directly asks about enjoyment, but these are, although they may reflect enjoyment, they also are really questions more about behavioral intentions than anything. So like, what would you potentially do in the future? So, you may be willing to use a video chat for, other reasons than just enjoyment. GSS is paying incentives, so maybe that's a reason that you would be willing to do it in the future, for example. So basically what we did here is that all the statistical models that I'm going to mention for data quality look at the model in two different ways. One is using the dependent variable as the survey enjoyment variable, the single item question. The other is both the three item survey climate index, which is these three questions combined, and scaled from 0 to 1 if combining those three. The Cronbach's alpha for this is a 0.743 as an index. So that's kind of the first step of creating that index of survey climate. So then the question is, all right, what then influences this self-reported survey favorability? Now, some literature exists on this. So, for example, one thought that in particular might be useful is whether people feel they have an interest in science. Because if we're doing research and I've got an interest in research, I might be more interested in taking surveys and feel more positively about surveys. And there's some literature indicating that. And then there's also things like social, political, and economic environment that may shape individuals' perception of the costs and benefits of survey participation. So then what does that mean in terms of the GSS, though? So in order to get at this idea of a science climate, and whether people thought that their opinions of science and how that might influence their thoughts about surveys, we created a science climate index. And we used three different questions here. And these are questions that are agree-disagree questions, which admittedly have some problems. But agree-disagree questions, they're scaled 0 to 1. This climate index is scaled 0 to 1. And then basically it's a combination of these three questions. So scientists work for the good of humanity, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Scientists help solve, I'm going to step on this and trip over it. Scientists help solve problems, again, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Scientists want to make life better for the average person, again, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The Cronbach's alpha on this is 0.804. So again, we use this as, and we think this would be a particularly useful predictor of survey favorability. And we also include quite a few different demographic variables: age, race, whether the respondent is Hispanic or not, whether they are female or not, the mode of the survey, which I mentioned earlier, but I'll get into a little bit more, political party. The idea here is that potentially, if again, similar to science, you might think Democrats might be a little bit more interested in surveys and trusting in surveys. And then finally, income. There's lots of different income variables in the GSS, and the way that the GSS measures it it codes it is somewhat problematic. We rescale it. So the GSS, there's a variable called income 16, and what that does is it uses a lot of categories it's used for a number of years that scale at like a $2,000 each range at the end. So it's like 1,000 to 2,000, 2,000 to 3,000. So what we do is collapse those scales to be somewhat similar and basically $20,000 bands. Rather than using a lot of bands at the end and just a few bands at the top, this scale goes up to $170,000. This is the max. So we scale this where basically the 1 is your minimum income, 10 is your maximum income in this case. So in this case, 10 is $170,000 and above, 1 is 0 to 20,000.
And are you doing something on purpose by not including education?
So
Come up later.
yeah, so we actually, that's. There was I think we actually, no, we do actually include education. I was gonna say, I think I just mislabeled it on this. We do also include education, and I should mention that education is a continuous variable in the GSS. It is measured as number of years of education, ranging from basically 0 indicating no formal schooling at all the way up to 20, which is basically a PhD. It'd be 8 years of post high school education. So thank you for asking about that. You're right on that. So these are the variables that we include, and yes, plus education. My apologies for not including that. You made me do a double take there. So here is the model predicting survey enjoyment. Now this is, again, for the single item question. There's a separate model, and I'll talk about that in a second for the index. So probably not all that surprisingly, science climate is positively related to, so this is coefficient and 95% confidence interval, by the way. So science climate is positively related to survey enjoyment, which again, not that surprising. If somebody has got a lot of confidence in science, believes in science, they may want to participate in science. So that is not particularly surprising. Age is slightly negative. Not tremendously negative. Education is not a significant indicator. Interestingly enough, the total incentive is actually negative related, which is somewhat surprising. Yeah, that's true. African American, not significant. Hispanics, positive. A non-Hispanic other, which is not a very large category, is positive. Female, more positive. And these are also not particularly surprising that people would potentially enjoy a survey more if the survey is done in person or over the phone.
Is combo the combination of those two?
Yes, that's correct. Yep, combo. Well, yes, this is the combo mode. So you could be combo web, but the challenge to this, and this is one of the reasons that the confidence interval is so large, is that the number of combo observations is pretty small. So I think it's 100 and I'm forgetting it off the top of my head, but it's like 130. So my sense is that that's why that's confidence intervals. That's probably that large.
I'm sorry, so I forgot how this is coded. So this is a linear model, but it's
Yes, this is an OLS regression model. Sorry, what's that?
Is it binary outcome or is it?
No, this is in this case it's a continuous variable. So the question ranges from not an hold on, let me check here. It's a 1 to 5 variable. I'm forgetting the exact wording of it, but it's a scale variable. Sorry about that.
Bivariate. Each one of those bivariate, kind of?
Or is it all in the same model?
This is all in the same model.
Oh.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, so you probably need to run it without science climate in the model because plausibly that's post-treatment, right? Like, education would predict science and just see if the
That's true.
demographic stories are really different.
That's true.
Not to say this isn't worth, this model's fine. I think of those as,
But that's a good point.
yeah, but I would think that education predicts science climate and other things like that.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's true.
And Andy, sorry, just to make sure I understand. So looking at the mode, so is that a?
These are dummy variables.
They're all dummies.
Yes, so these are dummy variables. So this is
Sorry, what's the reference?
reference is web.
Is web.
Yeah, so this is saying that in-person respondents are responding more favorably than as opposed to web. Phone is the same thing. Combo, again, the confidence interval, and that's relatively large. But these two are not particularly surprising, kind of what we know about mode effects there. Party ID was also not significant. Income was slightly negative.
Yeah.
But that's a good point, Dave.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, I just worried like party ID and education in particular might be drivers of science climate, and we're blocking that causal pathway. But I mean,
That's
I
true.
still generally believe your story. I'm just thinking like I'd have to see it both ways.
no, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you. So then this is the index. So same model, but instead of using the single items survey enjoyment variable, this is using the index ranging. Again, this is scaled. It's a continuous variable scaled 0 to 1 in this case. It is continuous though. It's an index of those 3 questions combined. The science climate in this case is not significant. And age is positive and significant. Now, one thing that you'd think is again, this kind of goes back to my earlier discussion about, so science climate, you would think, well, okay, in the other model, it's positive and significant, and that makes kind of logical sense. But one of the challenges, again, to the index was, and this is why we wanted to run the 2 models separately, is that essentially one is directly asking enjoyment versus 2 others are asking a behavioral intention. So it may be possible that science climate may not in fact change your intent to actually do a survey as opposed to your enjoyment of the survey. A lot of other variables here. Education was not significant. Incentive slightly negative again. African American, Hispanic, not significant. Non-Hispanic, other, slightly significant, or slightly positive, significant. Female, positively significant. Again, mode in person and phone, that is somewhat surprising, but again, the question here is the difference between enjoyment and behavioral intention, right? So inviting somebody to your house means something different. You might enjoy the survey, but would you really kind of decide in a behavioral intention that you want to invite somebody to your house again? That may be a different thing that's really getting at there. And so that's one of the reasons that we thought that although these results seem kind of counterintuitive, they may actually be somewhat logical in this case. Yeah.
What is convenient?
Right, exactly. Right. You can just, people might not enjoy it as much if you've got an interviewer in your...
Worry about your house being clean and
Right.
and a stranger coming over and I don't know, getting sick, I don't know.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm thinking of the time period this is collecting.
Right, it's 2022, so yeah, I mean, we're somewhat post the big peak of COVID, but yeah, certainly during COVID, if that was, and there's probably, if this is fall of 22, there's still some concern there of COVID, not as much.
I always being a little glib with that, but even just like trusting a stranger that comes over.
Yeah.
If you're older, I don't know, living alone, whatever, right?
Right.
So, and then you had said you were a little, at least I don't know, I picked up in your voice about the incentive. I mean, I guess though too, right? If you're making $150 on this, I guess you are the less inclined.
Yes, like,
So that automatically, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like if it costs, that's basically a measure of how much does it cost for you to do the survey.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
That's totally-
Right.
Yeah,
And like, you gotta pay me this much,
But-
well, I don't want
but
to.
you're well.
Right. Exactly. Right. Right. Exactly. Right. $200 if I got to pay you $200 to take the survey.
Probably don't like surveys.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
Don't publish these results because it'll incentivize respondents to demand more money.
Right. Exactly. That's right. And
Maybe get you up the hook with the IRB though.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get a little bit more information, I should say. We're working with the GSS folks. One of the people on this project is from Newark, and she's working with the GSS folks to get a little bit more concrete information about exactly how incentives are determined as well. So there's a pretty big range of incentives, again, ranging from 50 to over 200. So the question is also, how are those, like you said, if we have $200, why is the reason we're paying somebody $200 as opposed to $50? Yeah.
Multiple callbacks, like if you have to close a survey, like you're like, especially if you're partly, like if I'm half done,
Right.
I would pay a lot as an interviewer to get
Right.
that done. You know what I mean? Because like you hate to lose that respondent. Sorry.
Right, especially for a 40-minute survey.
Yeah.
oh, the direction of this composite versus the single item.
Mm-hmm.
If you're to the right, my right, you're more favorable on both of them?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because some of them flip.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
I think that's exactly the right. So like these do flip, and I think that's potentially right. So it's the index of all 3 questions at this point. So it's the enjoyment plus the 2 behavioral. Would you participate in the web, and would you participate in person in the future? And so this is kind of getting at, well, this flips in particular. So you'd think, okay, in terms of enjoyment, mode was over this in person and phone were over here. 'Cause people might enjoy that more. But in terms of behavioral intention, kind of based on what Rich mentioned also, is that would you, if you're saying, would I do this in the future? Would I invite somebody into my house in the future? That may be a different behavioral intent than enjoyment. Like you might enjoy the survey having you could imagine, sorry if I just hit the microphone there. But you might enjoy having the interviewer there and being able to answer questions if you have any clarifying questions or something like that, which is obviously a benefit of face-to-face interviews, but you'd have to invite somebody into your home.
Because if you're interested in mode, it's probably not good to use the composite. Because it's likely that the direction of the effect is different for the individual question.
Yeah,
And you'd want to interpret it that way.
that's true.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And please tell me if you're just going to cover this elsewhere.
No.
I was thinking you do a good test of these two different outcomes would be in the panel component of the GSS, see which of those predicts non-attrition.
That's true.
Wouldn't that be a good test?
That'd be a great trick.
Right, because that would tell you like the enjoyment, this is the element of enjoyment that matters. I mean, non-attrition is not the same as being willing to do the survey, but it's still, I would think, informative to that.
I would normally write this down on a piece of paper. I'm going to write it on my phone.
That's right. For it to be in a panel though, right?
But like, panel attrition probably has some stuff in common with not doing the survey, right? And so that you could exploit the panel nature of the data in early, although I don't know if does every way of GSS now have a panel? I can't remember.
But that's a good point.
But I think that what Dave's suggesting would be, like, it would be a really important fact.
Right.
Supporting your interest in this.
Absolutely.
And I'm perfectly willing to live and die by predictive validity in lieu of anything else.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? I'll take it. Yeah, it doesn't
Right.
predict non-attrition.
Right.
And that tells me your outcome is important.
And party energy is.
Party ID is scaled from 0 is the strongest. So that's
a scale, sorry.
it's a scale. Yes. So party ID is a scale, and that is scaled from 0 is the strongest Republican possible. So it's asking, are you a Democrat, and how strong of a Democrat you are or not. And so 0 is the strongest Republican possible. 1 is the strongest Democrat possible. 0.5 is is independence.
Yeah.
That goes against some other literature.
Yeah.
That's, okay.
I'm not sure that this index really helps you, although you can keep it, because, I mean, it's only 3 items. The first item
That's
is
true.
good by itself.
Right.
So maybe just treat the other 2 as just separately interesting outcomes.
That's true.
This index does kind of, I believe you that it does have some decent reliability.
Right.
But it is kind of tapping into different concepts for your purposes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you really gain a lot, although there's no harm in showing another outcome in my mind.
Right.
I would say it would be maybe more productive just to look at each of those outcomes separately.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Multivariate regression too is 3 separate outcomes. And you
Yeah,
can see
yeah.
differences across that way. Big
Yeah,
flex,
that's kind of interesting.
You're saying like take essentially each.
It's a system.
Yeah.
So instead
that's
of,
interesting.
since they correlate, what's the average correlation? So there's 0.7, but.
I don't know if that man.
Solid alpha.
Yeah.
In this day and age.
Yeah.
Exactly, 3 items, yeah.
Right.
So that's why I was wondering if maybe like a seemingly unrelated regression or something like that.
Yeah.
Probably
Right.
not gonna make much of a difference if you model them 3 different ways.
Yeah.
But
That's a good idea, though.
Predictability might tell you which of these is interesting or whatever, but I think like on its face, like the fact that you're getting these flipping of coefficients and stuff makes me like, I don't know really if you're throwing different things in one bag here.
And that's kind of what we had thought is that, yeah, I mean, right. And that's where we came to the whole behavioral intention versus enjoyment is that they really, initially we had thought, well, this makes a lot of sense that if somebody would enjoy a survey, you'd think that that is kind of measuring the same thing. If I would be willing to participate in a future survey, it's measuring something about the same thing. But then we kind of thought about it when we saw the science flip, we thought, well, that may be the reason why that's happening.
Look at your R-squared too.
Yeah.
That's kind of high.
Right. Well, I will say that not all of them are this high.
But yeah, but generally speaking, it's not.
Right. Not all of them are that high. We'll say that. There are some, especially when you get to the data quality models, some of them are much lower. But this one ended up being all right. All right. Thank you for the comments and questions. I'm writing them down on my phone.
On your slides.
What's that?
We're holding you up on your slides.
No, I would appreciate it.
Stimulate a small group.
No, I think this is great. And my apologies, I'm doing this on my phone. I was like, oh, I should write this down on a piece of paper, but I don't have it. So I'm not texting people as I'm doing this. I'm just writing down notes.
I would have been impressed.
It's that Bruce Link again. No, just kidding. Okay, so those are some predictors of survey favorability. So then the question is, all right, so what about the impact of survey favorability on data quality? And there's some literature on this. So there's links between individual effort and data quality by Roger Toronjo and John Crosby. And then more recently, attitudes towards surveys connected to respondent motivation to comply with survey requests, whether or not they're going to complete a survey or not. And so when we think about data quality, we focus on 3 different measures here. One is acquiescence response bias. So this is agree or disagree questions, and there's a tendency of people to agree, and I'll talk more about that in a second. Non-differentiation, so otherwise known as, in this case, as straight lining, and an extreme response style is selecting on a scale either the highest or the lowest value. So again, acquiescence response style first. So people do tend to have a tendency to agree with somebody rather than disagree with somebody. So for example, this is one of the questions that the GSS asks: how much do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Alternative medicine provides better solutions for health problems than mainstream medicine. And so the response options for this are strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, or strongly disagree. And so what we've done here is there are 15 questions total that ask these types of agree, disagree questions. And what we've done is we've coded either strongly agree or agree as potential acquiescence. So that is coded as 1, everything else is coded as 0. And then what we do is we come up with an average of the 15 questions and code that from a scale it from 0 to 1. So the idea here is that higher values indicate higher acquiescence. So that's one data quality measure.
Do the
sorry.
content flip so that, agreeing in one instance is for the concept, is disagreeing?
I believe all these actually don't. I don't believe these ones do flip in this particular instance. If I'm trying to remember off the top of my
I
head.
think you'd want that.
Yeah.
And so the idea is like if I always strongly agree, I would be high.
Correct.
That would signal bias, right?
Correct. That would signal yes. That
Well, maybe they actually agree.
well,
Right.
and we get into this actually. That's a good point, because one of the things you might think also, not only might people might agree, but so that's why we use 15 questions, because you wouldn't think that you would necessarily strongly agree on all 15 questions. That might be more rare. But the other thing is, if you think about it, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but it may also be that the people that are participating in surveys, because they want to participate in a survey, might also tend to give those stronger answers, like, oh yeah, I'm really passionate about this issue or that issue. See, that might be something that might be working there.
I'd be surprised if they didn't flip, like you say, Bruce. Like, I mean, that's such a standard, like, textbook survey method thing to, like, switch the ideological valence of different questions to avoid, like, I'm sure GSS knows to avoid this in general.
They do, but I believe, so the GSS doesn't have, so there's, this particular series of questions is, I'm not sure this particular series does it. There are other, yes, there are other, I'll check on this, but I believe that this particular series does not.
Do they have a social desirability measure, like a Crown-Marlowe? That's what we used to use for the acquiescence.
Right.
Those are two flip. And
Yeah.
if they agreed with things where, you'd have social desirability, you said yes, and the next one, you'd have social desirability, you said no.
Right. That's a good, I'll have to check that. I've got to recheck the questions on that, but that's a good point. You're right. It would seem very, like, the GSS has to be obviously aware of this, but I am forgetting the coding of the data because I just went through this, but you're right. I think that these 15 questions are in fact coded in the same way, and I think it's, yeah, but I will check it to make sure. But I know that we did look at, yeah, I'm pretty sure that these are coded the same way in this particular sequence. Non-differentiation is another potential measure of data quality here. So there's 14 questions here that have the response options a great deal, only some, or hardly any. So for example, you might have a question, would you say you have a great deal of confidence, only some confidence, or hardly any confidence at all in banks and financial institutions? And there's lots of, would you say this, would you say that? So this is just an example. So what we're doing here is the scale point variation method proposed by Kim et al. And so the idea here is if respondents are using more scale points on a battery, the measure becomes larger. So the idea is if they're saying, you know, great deal, great deal, great deal, great deal, the measure is going to be quite small. But if they vary, then the measure will become larger. So the idea here is if you've got we're trying to see if we're trying to avoid straight lining, essentially. People just, you know, here we go. This is I'm going to get through the survey as quickly as possible, mark the options off. These 14 questions, again, are combined together and then scaled from 0 to 1 again. And then finally, extreme response style, and this is answering one of the most extreme response options provided, either the highest or the lowest. So, for example, how willing would you be to pay higher taxes to improve the level of health care for all people in the United States? And these response options range from very willing, fairly willing, neither willing nor unwilling, fairly unwilling, or very unwilling. The idea here is that both ends of this would be coded as extreme response. And again, you'd expect some variation, but not necessarily a tremendous amount. And so this one, we've got 38 questions that have on the GSS, in this particular GSS, that have a 5-point bipolar scale. So again, this is using this as an example. So this would be a 5-point bipolar scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These two would be coded as the extreme response. There's 8 questions also that use a 7-point bipolar scale. And so the calculation of extreme response is total number of questions with the highest lowest answer divided by the total number of valid responses for that series. So again, this ranges from 0 to 1.
Sorry, Andy,
Yeah.
So is there then 2 measures then? Is a total number of questions with the highest answer, total with the lowest?
No,
Or
you don't care.
It doesn't matter. Yep, it's just extreme response one way or the other. So you're either saying, you know, the very lowest, you'd either be doing very willing or very unwilling. Those would both be coded as extreme. So yeah, and then so that's the calculation there. And then the approach here, we're using OLS regression again. And so the idea is that survey enjoyment would then have an impact on data quality. Either as, again, we've run the model both ways, kind of getting at what you mentioned, like, you know, survey enjoyment might be just fine just as the single question, but we also tried it with the index to see kind of where we were on that. And then we throw in the controls as well. And again, we run basically a model for each one of these. So we do a model using single item with acquiescence, a single item, extreme response, single item, non-differentiation, index, acquiescence, index, extreme, and index non-differentiation.
Andy, are you going to give us some descriptors on these data quality outcomes? Because those are super interesting to me. And for instance, so tell me if you're going to give us descriptors on those.
I don't have them in the presentation, but I could get them to you.
Well, I was going to say, it's just interesting. I was wondering which ones have more or less variation, which ones are bigger, more problems. Just as a person that uses surveys, I'm actually kind of curious.
Yeah.
Is extreme response like really rare, whereas acquiescence is very common? And you can look at like the coefficient of variation on them, just
Right.
how typical, you know, the level and the coefficient of variation. So I'm just curious as a survey researcher, like, which of these do I really need to worry about?
Yeah.
More than others?
That's a good point. Yeah, and that's definitely, yeah, I can get those actually. I could probably run them pretty quickly. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'm
Interesting.
going to write this. Again,
There's another value of what you're doing.
Yeah.
yeah.
Unless has this been done, this sort of inventory of those 3 data quality outcomes for the GSS? Because it's a publicly useful thing to know.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, there's been lots of papers that have been done on these individually, not to my knowledge of a recent GSS, no.
Sorry, this is
No.
not a project, but you could do a follow-up paper where you looked at this over time.
That's true.
Interesting to see as acquiescence increased with non-response. I mean, I think this is just very interesting as a survey researcher.
Yeah, and that might, right, and maybe you look at the data over time, because I mean, we've got data back to,
Confidence, I mean, when we think about political polarization.
Yeah.
More extreme.
Yeah, totally.
And,
Right.
The modes, which modes predict these things.
Absolutely. Right.
Oh, that's good too.
There should be, God, there better be no way, I hope the answer is none.
Like when,
Because I mean, like, if people are like so sensitive to mode, we're in trouble.
Right.
Like, I hope it doesn't matter.
Right. Your survey project just got more expensive because of that.
Oh, jeez.
This is well, but Nork is happy because they're going to charge you more now.
That's right. They charge the most of this.
Yeah.
Hey, Andy, real quick question, when you're doing web with this.
Yeah.
This is gonna help me to understand this too.
Mhm.
Do you have any idea what it looks like? I mean, so like if I agree to do web, do I get multiple questions? Can I technically go down one, or do I get one question at a time?
I don't actually know, but we could probably get that information from the GSS team. It would be pretty easy to do. I've not taken a GSS survey myself.
Those kinds of things facilitate, well, I don't know what your findings are yet, but,
When I do a Qualtrics survey, I get to make a choice about.
Yeah, you do.
You do. I just don't know what.
You can go faster if you put them in chunks,
Right.
which would lead to the possibility of line.
Of more straight lining, right? Because you've got that's. Geez. Gotta write this down also.
versus, quality.
Presentation.
I just think like acquiescence response bias is the worst. I mean, I just think, because like I would do that.
Oh, absolutely. If you get a battery of 25 questions all on one page, right?
I mean, what about that? There was that classic error where everyone picks B. They pick the second from left.
Right.
Is that a form of acquiescence response bias, right? Because that would be like you're not just agreeing, you're just.
I mean, be more straight lining, really.
Yeah, straight lining. That's like a very.
It's more non-differentiation than
Response
anything.
position bias is what that's.
Oh, you're right. Position bias. Oh, absolutely. Position bias is absolutely a thing. Yeah.
So if I always pick B.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Right.
And you've
Yeah,
got
there's no-
right. Okay. Oh, sorry.
There's a possibility, we have the extreme responders,
Mhm.
but then we have the people who just put in the middle.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's all,
Well, but we would hopefully catch that on the non-differentiation measure then.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah, you pick that up.
But you're right. There also could be, in general, you could imagine there'd be potentially primacy and recency effects too, right? So primacy effects, whatever is presented first, this person might choose, or the recency effect, the one that they heard last. But that would be different, right? Like and it would be like if you've got a phone survey, you might have primacy and recency effects and be concerned about that. On the web, you're probably less concerned about that. So this is results first. So acquiescence response style, this is survey enjoyment in this case. Increased survey enjoyment, it has more acquiescence in this case. And one thing that we kind of thought about with this is that, again, people that kind of by nature agree to participate in surveys might actually have these kind of like, yes, I want to agree with you. Yes, I have a strong opinion about this. So that might be something about that is actually driving that particular result. Age, education, incentive, non-Hispanic, African-American, Hispanic, non-Hispanic, other are all insignificant, as is female. Mode, in-person and phone, have more acquiescence response as compared to web, which is kind of interesting. Probably not that surprising because if you've got so the idea of like again you're agreeing with somebody, and if I've got somebody in front of me, I'm probably more likely to agree with them than if I've got a computer screen that I have to agree with or not, right? So that does make some logical sense if we think about that.
But does the GSS work though? Because there's some judgy kinds of questions that could be really prone to.
Oh, absolutely.
Credibility on that, about how you think about poor people or races or whatever.
Absolutely.
And so
And in fact, there are questions in there.
Question though, on the, isn't that more is that maybe more the respondent or the interviewer turns it to? Kind of like I'm thinking ad health when they ask all the teens all the sex questions.
Right. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can find that out. I think it's a good question to ask. Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, that would totally vice versa. Just real quick, another kind of thought was, okay, you got statistical significance, but the other thing, I don't know, maybe I'm a little less worried because the effect sizes look kind of small.
Right. Yes.
So, I mean, in that case, still a little.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the effect sizes are small, but also the scale of the dependent variable is, small also. So in that sense,
Oh, it's not, I thought it was
Right.
Oh, okay, oh, then it is bigger.
Yeah. So it's a small number, but it's in the scheme of things bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I thought the
Yeah.
was quoted on a higher scale than that. Okay.
Yeah, the original question was a scale that was, if I'm almost 100% sure, it's 1 to 5, and I think then that's recoded to 0 to 1. So everything is scaled 0 to 1.
But this is encouraging news because you're finding that you're not seeing more acquiescence for web-based surveys.
Right.
Which is great news.
Absolutely. Right.
That's what I would worry about.
Yeah.
And then it makes, in general, like if you think about it, that does make some sense because we would expect, we don't have a mail survey to compare to, but you would expect probably the mail survey would have less acquiescence also because again, it's a self-administered questionnaire as opposed to an interviewer-administered questionnaire. But to Rich's point.
Acquiescence would be just picking up, like, I guess that sort of response, sort of like just a tendency to agree because it's
Right.
easy.
Right.
And you're not seeing that with the web-based surveys.
That's right.
You're more likely to disagree to be easy.
Yep.
That's somewhat encouraging.
Right.
Web surveys.
Exactly. Party ID, slightly negative, and the Spanish language is not significant in this case. And like I said, so Spanish language in this case is just this is a binary. It's either Spanish or English. So this case English is the reference category.
What is the share of the sample of Spanish language?
I want to say it's about 1,200 compared to the rest of it. So I guess it's 2,300. So a decent size, but 1,200 I think 2,300 is the English.
Oh, okay, so, about a third.
Yeah, or so
They
I believe so.
Wow,
I believe so.
that's cool.
Yeah.
But you only have an N of 90.
For this particular, yeah, yes, good question about that. So the reason is that some of these questions are not asked of all ballots. So yeah, there's 3 ballots, there's ballot A, ballot C, ballot B, ballot C. So some of these questions don't exist on all the ballots, so the N does become smaller for this. Survey climate index, again, we already talked about kind of the challenges with that. Survey enjoyment in this case is negatively related to this, but mode and in-person and phone are consistent in this case. So that's but again, that would be expected. I don't know that you would expect to see a big difference between the climate index and the single item question in this case, because we're talking about in this case acquiescence. So that's that model. So then we can transition over to non-differentiation. Non-differentiation survey enjoyment is not a significant predictor in this case of non-differentiation. Age is somewhat negative. African American Hispanic is somewhat positive and significant. In this case, mode in person has a negative effect on non-differentiation compared to web. Which that probably isn't that surprising. Again, I guess, and again, kind of to Bruce's point, I think it was Bruce's point of how is it presented? Is it presented as a big block or is it presented as individual questions? You would imagine that if it's in person, that people are probably going to straight line somewhat less. That makes some logical sense, but it does matter the way that the mode is that the questions are presented in the web version too.
Is enjoyment the scale or the single item?
In this case, this is a single item.
Okay.
The next plot I'll show you is the index. So yeah, this is the single item survey enjoyment, correct. And then when we go to the index, same thing, it is not significant there. Again, mode in person, not terribly surprising there. You would expect less non-differentiation from an in-person mode than potentially web, although again, worth exploring kind of how the web survey is presented. And then finally, extreme response style. We ran 2 different models here. One is with the 5-point questions, because again, there's 38 of those, and then one with the 7-point questions. So extreme response style, survey enjoyment is positive related to extreme response style. And again, our thought here is that this goes back to, again, the people that are really interested in participating in surveys might in fact have hold or express very strong opinions about the things that are on that survey. So it might be that they either are very strongly support or very strongly oppose something. So that's not terribly surprising. Age, education, not significant. Incentives, slightly negatively related. non-Hispanic, African American, and non-Hispanic other, not significant Hispanic, slightly positive. In-person mode, slightly negative and significant in this case. So if you're in person, you're slightly less likely to, have those extreme responses. And then other party ID is slightly negative. The phone mode combo in Spanish are all insignificant in this case.
There's your middle responders for
Right.
in-person people that don't want to offend.
That's right. That's true. I will say that, kind of to Rich's point, as it mentioned, the R squared looked great earlier. The R squared on this particular model ends up going way down. And actually, this is
Rooting for that.
right. That's true. That's true. This was actually, the extreme responses are lowest R squared by a decent chunk. I think our other models were 0.05, 0.06, and then the predictors of enjoyment were 0.2.
I can imagine the extreme response is like really like a very polarized distribution in your data. Like most people are not extreme responders.
Right.
And then there's these few unusual people.
Right.
I would think.
Yeah.
So then it's hard to fit that model.
Right. The index, again, survey climate index here, not significant. And again, that goes back to, is this the same thing as enjoyment? We're not 100% sure on that one. Mode, again, is, negative and significant. Total incentive, again, also negative and somewhat negative and significant as well. Female in this case is slightly positive and significant. Other variables, phone, combo, not significant. Party ID, slightly negative, and Spanish is not significant.
And party ID again, so like
Yeah, so party ID is,
conservatives are less likely to be extreme responders?
yeah, so in this case, if you are, so one in this case is the most liberal, well, not liberal, Democrat in this case, is party ID. There is a political ideology variable. We don't have both of them in there because they're correlated at something like 0.7, so we didn't put both of them in the model. We had to pick one. So yeah, in this case, one is your most your strongest Democrat, and 0 is your strongest Republican. Right. I guess it's kind of an interesting interpretation, I guess. Right. Right. So again, in this case, your Democrats are somewhat less extreme. Yeah. Which I get.
Do you know how many follow-ups it took to get the person to do the survey?
Yes, so I believe that's in the paradata, but they just released the paradata. I don't know exactly what the paradata looks like, but I believe that data is in the paradata.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if, I'm worried a little bit about these mode effects picking that up. Like, did the GSS come to them and say, hey, if you can do web or phone, great,
Right.
I don't know, and I just thinking, like, we really care about that general willingness to do a survey and behavior,
Right. No, yeah.
Check that. It's certainly necessary to check that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because you get this incentive and the mode, I think, are mixing those things.
And the other thing that ties in, and sorry if I missed this,
No.
other questions for you. Survey enjoyment is in general, right? Even though you're asking after the experience, but is there a question, they don't ask a question about like, how is this experience for you?
The question that's asked is how much do you enjoy taking surveys in general?
Yeah, okay, but there's nothing about the experience of,
This particular survey, no. Like, yeah, there's no like at the end of like, how did you like the GSS today, kind of thing.
no follow-up with, from Newark to say like, hello, Mr. Smith, how was.
Just wondering how it went. No, at least not in this data set. Now, if there's something that they have collected, we don't know about it, but it could be, we didn't see that in the paradata. We were looking for it. We thought could be something like that could be in there, but it wasn't. So it's not to say, GSS held back on releasing the paradata for 2 months, so it's possible they might release more paradata. I don't know, and so that's why the member of our team that's from Newark is going to check with the GSS team on some of these things. Like, are we going to get more of this? What to make of it?
Yeah, because technically the response then is affected by the experience of the, you get a recency bias.
Right. That's true. So then, okay.
Survey enjoyment, you also, one thing you guys should check would be like, the distribution of that outcome variable is.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that like most of us would be acquiescent and be like, yeah, they're fine.
Right.
But, or are there people that are like really opposed to surveys that do complete the survey? Like, you know, like.
It's pretty mixed. I don't know I'm forgetting the exact distribution, but it's pretty mixed.
It is pretty, there's actual real heterogeneity.
Mm-hmm.
And it always is asked at the end of the survey? No.
The position, I'm trying to think where that is in the position. I don't know off the top of my head, but that's a good question. Yeah, the position.
Just like,
In a way, it's almost like an interaction, right, of survey enjoyment and incentive, because you can imagine people that might enjoy but don't have time versus people who really hate doing them,
yeah.
and, you know, yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind doing, you know, and I think about it, it's good for science, but, you know, but time crunch and other things, right?
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, I enjoy taking surveys, but on the other hand, you know,
Right.
it's, you know, we just had a faculty search, things were busy.
And what the topic is, so
Yeah.
that too, where it's like the GSS is a.
Right. Or, I mean, I still get, because I still have a Chicago area code number, I still get calls about Chicago politics. It's like, well, I don't live there. I'm not going to participate in your survey. I don't feel like I should be participating in your survey either. Okay, so extreme response style, 7-point scale, survey enjoyment, slightly positive in this case, and a significant age, slightly positive. The N on this is slightly smaller because there's less, again, ballots that have, so the 5-point scale, I should mention, is most of the sample. Again, total sample is 3,544. So most of the people got the 5-point questions, but only about 2,000 people got the 7-point questions. So that may be one reason why we see something, some difference in the results here.
And I'm sorry, can you explain to me again, I was a
No.
little lost, the previous item and this item differ, dependent variable?
So in this case, so the previous two models looked at extreme response for questions that used a 5-point bipolar scale. So, and these models look at the extreme response for questions that use a 7-point scale. And so we didn't want to put them all in the same model because we didn't feel like that was an honest thing to do in terms of coding.
No, right. I'm sorry, I just
yeah.
got the differentiation, which.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So this is still extreme response, but instead of the 5-point bipolar scale, we're now looking at a 7-point bipolar scale.
Politics flips, although it's not significant.
Still, yeah, not significant in the 7-point. Yeah. Yep. So
I take back, I misunderstood, I take back my comment from before, that's not surprising on the previous findings, that, yeah, we would expect more extreme out of more conservative.
right. So this thing I think makes good logical sense. You take, okay, Democrats are going to be somewhat less extreme than Republicans. Is kind of what this is showing here. Yeah. I think that makes logical sense. Yeah, it's not significant in the 7-point. And again, part of this is that, you have a somewhat different sample size in this case. So it may be partially that. But yeah. And it also may be the type of, 7-point questions may elicit a different variety of responses too, where people are not necessarily, you've got more potential spots you can put your response. You may respond somewhat differently.
I do wonder though, between all these, because your sample sizes vary quite considerably. And so
Yes.
I'm wondering to what degree your sample composition might affect some of your findings. So it might be, I don't know, maybe a sensitive analysis of doing
That's a good
some
point.
sort of complete case across all your measures or something like that as a way to keep it consistent.
That's a good point.
And it might mean nothing, I don't know. It might just give you more power.
Right.
Well, but even that would be, I don't know, maybe a little tricky too, to make some inferences if, if something's just right at the line, but, the confidence interval crosses, but then,
Right.
the line pops over, I don't know.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And then finally, the index. So this is 7-point with the index. And so survey enjoyment is not significant in this case. Again, challenges with the index we've talked about all along. Age is somewhat positively significant in this case. In-person and phone are somewhat positive in this case and significant. But again, yeah, it would be worth, I think, looking at the sample sizes in this case. Right. Spanish in this case, although, yeah, I mean, confidence interval is pretty big, but yeah, I mean, it's yeah, that would be the only challenge there. But yeah, we didn't see, I mean, in general, we didn't see a whole lot of result in terms of the Spanish variable. You see some kind of these marginal significance here, but not a bunch.
And most of these are, most of these are categorical, but.
Yes.
And simple binaries or dummies but, I guess you do have you got age and education and
Yep.
income.
And
So
yeah,
I do wonder, what the betas might show you versus the.
that's a good point.
Standardized.
That's a good point.
So this way you can see what are the big contributors.
That's a good point. Thank you. All right, so I want to be respectful. No. No, I appreciate this. In a lot of ways, I'm kind of glad because it's, this has allowed some really, I appreciate the feedback, I really do. It's been really great and very helpful. Again, single item question and survey climate index differ. We talked about why. Extreme response, again, the initial results are somewhat surprising, but again, similar to, we talked about people that are participating in surveys, yes, they might in fact have these more extreme responses. Yes, I really feel that strongly about this either one way or the other, and I want to tell you about it because it's a survey, right? So some of these, the results may initially seem surprising, but also can have some reasonable explanations. Couple of ideas for future research in addition to some of the ideas that you gave me. So GSS do an experiment with the initial mode of conduct. That's not supposed to say conduct. That's supposed to be contact. So this is the mode sequence variable, and they just made that available, and so that's something also that could be interesting. We also thought about potentially including items there's a couple of different items that ask about depression. So has anybody ever told you that you have depression? There's also one, have you felt down or depressed in the last 4 weeks? We might think that if you're depressed, that might affect your willingness to participate in these types of activities. And so we also thought maybe we could potentially think about including that depression variable to either as a combination of the two measures or just including them separately. That might be also useful. And then, right, that's true, right. Other pair data might also be useful. So the length of interview I mentioned is in there. So that's worth exploring. And the number of contacts, if we can get the number of contacts, would be really useful.
Yeah.
What about prosociality? Like some sort of.
Yeah, there's that's your question. I keep thinking about this too. There's this personality / sentiment dimension of life.
Right.
That you want to tease out. And I don't know if that's. Are you worried about personality type or worried about?
I mean that for participation.
Yeah.
If I'm more kind of community oriented and I just want to give to other people, maybe or give kind of like the contributing to science thing.
Right.
I'm going to be more likely to participate in a survey.
I mean, but there's all this cluster of person stuff, disposition.
Agreeableness.
Yeah, all that, at first, I was thinking Big Five too, and I mean, you wanna net that out, but I don't know how you can, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's this question, but, I don't know. Cause we can throw over depression, we can throw other ideas, but there is this dimension of a person, right?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Willingness
do you want
to,
to control for it?
Yeah.
Is that like a normal,
Are
or is that
you,
just like the population?
friendly, open, agreeable person, or you a cranky person like Link, that's really what.
Link is getting all the criticisms today.
It's so much fun.
Oh.
Okay, another thing that you could get at, so we're most worried about our non-responders these days, where are we crashing in surveys? It's
That's
less
right.
educated folks, young folks, right? I mean, those are people we're losing, these people are just abandoning surveys, right? So could you interact your enjoyment variable with those key dimensions of those populations?
Oh, that's a good
that we're
point.
really struggling with in surveys. So there's groups of people that just don't do surveys anymore. It's the young, it's the less educated. Who else is the really most likely to drop out?
I mean, in a web survey, you have sometimes problems with seniors.
Seniors,
depending on mode.
Older folks are in responders. There's
Yeah.
no answer in the phone. There's
Right.
no answer in
For phone and in person,
surveys
absolutely.
in general.
Yeah.
I mean, this sort of, these were the great dilemmas with the Trump voters that don't do surveys but did vote in 2016 and surprised all the polls, right?
Right.
That sort of voter, that's less educated young men probably.
Yep.
And So you could upweight those, or you don't have enough cases, but you could like interact and see like, does this matter for that crowd in particular, where we really worry about survey non-response.
Yeah.
Do you got like an hour's worked a week variable too, I think, in
Wha-
the GSS?
What?
Yes.
An hour's worked per week.
Yes.
Maybe that's more of a, you know,
Yeah.
if I'm working 2 jobs or whatever, I don't have time.
That's true. Yeah.
Pay me $150 to $200.
Right. That's true. Hours worked. There is an hours worked variable. Hours worked. But yeah, that would indicate, right, if I'm really busy. And there is also that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because there is another variable that we've also thought of potentially putting in there, is it's the number of children in your household. Because if you've got children, you might have less time to yeah. So
We want to do the surveys to get away from our kids.
maybe. Right? You're like, yeah. You're like, on the one hand, I could do this, or I could take a survey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got more?
No, that is
Ideas.
it.
So, here's some thoughts for you.
Yeah,
You seem to like this.
I do.
Yeah. And so it could be something that you further develop, you know? And I was thinking that, from my point of view, the questions are kind of seat of the pants. You didn't make them up. They just happen to be there or something?
Right.
So if you've got this idea,
Yeah.
why not make your own list?
That's true.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Start to think about what those could be, and then consider getting funding to do a module of the GSS.
Yeah.
And then continue to elaborate this program of research that you've started.
You could
Right.
And I would also say that it'd be good to think about ways to, think really carefully about what you name things. But I don't really think that climate's the right name.
Hmm.
So whatever it is, name it what it is.
Right.
Name it according to what that one item said. But then climate is a great concept. So
Right.
make measures of climate, or find measures of climate.
That's true.
Because I think climates could be important
Right.
for your overall.
Yeah.
And what are the dimensions of this? So climate of the survey could be one, but what other dimensions of it are there? I mean, we've kind of talked about a little bit about personality and enjoying things.
Right.
So if it's, to what extent is something like that,
Yeah.
and make it a thing. You could try it out without the GSS, but
Right.
if you could get a module of the GSS,
Oh, yeah.
then that could have huge impact.
Seems a big thing too, I mean, with the GSS, because, it's so much attitude focused too, like the potential for, when I think of like kind of modes, or anything, like, if you gotta interact with another person, I mean, like the potential, I know they do a lot of training around this too.
Right.
But still, you would think like, and you ask, questions about like attitudes towards other groups, right?
Yes.
You're afraid of offending, you don't know what the person is on the phone, if you're like a bigoted kind of person. Or
Yeah.
you've got extreme views, so maybe that is a bias towards you're gonna be towards the center, or you're gonna,
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, so when you say climate, that's how I'm thinking about, not just about mode, but then also bias from the interviewer, the interviewer, and bias from the interview process too.
Right.
Now, how it's
Yeah.
set up, the people used to worry a lot about this when most things were in person.
Right.
About how do you first set up and the tone of the interaction you're gonna have. And
Right.
how securely do you convince them that they can say whatever they really want?
Right.
Those kinds of things, maybe they matter less now, but figuring out whatever that is in the current era,
Yeah.
and then, studying it, I think would be really.
Getting a module is like really expensive and hard, right? But the PIs to the GSS were probably happy to hear about this work. Do you know them at all?
I mean,
Bird and Jeremy Fries, and I think Stephen Morgan is the other one.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken.
so I don't know them personally, but one of my co-authors, Evgenia, does work with them on a semi-regular basis. She's a research methodologist there, so she's not on the GSS team, but she interacts with them enough. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I know all three of them, and I mean, like, I mentioned they'd be happy to kind of like say, if you could present a research program for like how to grow the GSS in the future, they throw on experimental questions and try different things. They'd be curious to see this stuff work too. So like befriending them would be totally worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah. It might be good to develop yourself a little bit first. Maybe do a Qualtrics thing,
Yeah.
to make sure it's yours.
Right.
Sorry.
You can run it on students and stuff experimentally at first too,
Yeah, and Qualtrics is pretty cheap.
Well, I mean, we have
What's that?
Qualtrics as part of.
But you gotta pay for it.
Well, 10 grand.
Money bags over here. I mean, like, you know, 10 grand later on. No, but I'm saying is like, you could do it on the cheap at first to see if there's promise.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Before you go get the grant.
Right. Right.
And you got there's the Senate grants too.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's not hard to get though, right?
I don't know, he's junior, so he's got they're directed towards his state career, so.
Yeah. And so to answer your question, Dave, you had asked about the survey enjoyment. I can give you the.
Yeah, tab it. Do you know
It's a decent distribution.
Nicely
Well,
distributed.
it's
Yeah.
actually quite varied.
Not at all.
Yeah.
404 people who took
Right.
the survey.
I mean, you gotta double check order of question.
Right.
When you apply the weights, they're 3 times.
Yeah, so like,
I'm just kidding.
yeah, how much, the weights are doing a lot of work these days with surveys. Myself, all of my projects, it's true. You know, like, without the weights, I don't know what I got.
Right.
But, I mean, you could muck around with those a little bit.
Yeah.
to see. Like, you could upweight some people that are interesting.
That's true.
You know what you could do, there's gotta be like a way to estimate like a propensity of doing a survey in general. Like, you know this from all these Pew
Right.
papers on like what,
Mhm.
what predicts survey completion these days, right? And like, create some sort of score on probability of being unlikely to do surveys.
Right.
And that's who we really care about, right?
And there's probably things like, I would imagine, your personality and that type of thing, like you're an introvert or you're an extrovert, that type of thing would probably be associated with, maybe at least for in person. I don't know about web, but
Yeah.
It could be good to get the survey they just took, too. Not surveys in general.
right. Yeah, because this one is talking about enjoy Butane, but you're right. If we could get a module, if we could get a module at some point that then followed up, I guess you could either ask it at the end of the survey or you could ask it in a follow-up call, kind of similar to what Rich mentioned, like, hey, this is GSS again. We wanted to do a survey about your survey.
Would it be possible to think of an experiment where you could create a survey that was really boring and one that's really exciting, interesting, and you could try to find out whether people.
I like that
want
idea.
to be about-
I like that idea.
And then see whether these problems are more prevalent in the boring ones.
That's a good point.
I don't know if you can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, again, probably would come down to money, but like,
Culture questions.
but you can imagine like you could do that pretty, like we know this about like questionnaire design broadly, right? We know that if we lead off with we don't lead off with demographic questions generally, so we lead off with something interesting to get them in. Like, what if we design a survey that actually leads off with demographic questions or, some kind of dull question that you wanted to ask, but you're going to put it in the middle of the survey, but now you're leading off with it. You can imagine you could vary that pretty easily.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I was thinking with the science question too, there's a part of me that thinks that when people think science, though, they think like people in like lab coats and laboratories.
Right.
Not survey research, so.
That's true.
I'm wondering at what degree that's really, you're really getting the construct you're trying to get at with those items.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, our thought was that, if you enjoyed and believed that science was doing good things, then surveys are a form of science. But you're right. Whether the respondent believes surveys or knows, I mean, I don't know that they need to believe it, but you're right. Whether social science is in fact a science, yeah,
Socialistic science.
right.